Okay, good. Thanks very much, and good afternoon, everybody. So today's presentation, we have basically our study on a negotiation between Google and Chinese government, and we will be unpacking what went in the overall the context of this negotiation, and then what is the current state of this. So with me, I'm Waqas. With me, I have Alison and Julliet. We will be co-presenting this presentation accordingly. And thanks very much to Professor Ta-Wei providing us this opportunity and this very interesting assignment. Yeah. So we move next. Okay, so we will be covering three major components during this presentation. First is timeline and the history, which I will be covering, followed by negotiation analysis using more a cultural framework will be shared by Julliet, and then followed by Alison, which will be sharing, okay, what could have been done differently to engage during this whole negotiation process. Yeah, so we move next. So this is a picture coming in during a launch of Google in China. And this is kind of a very historic moment when Google was entering in China. And if I see a brief history, we move next to a timeline which explains actually what happens along the way. So Google entered in 2000, in September 2000, first time in Chinese territory, but soon after that they found the first blockade by the authorities in 2002, and this was basically I would say a part of a main section which gone from 2000 to 2006, which was basically launching and relaunching of search services. Soon after that, in 2006 to 2009, Google started experiencing a lot of regulations and a pushback from Chinese authorities, and this era was more a censorship era for Google. There was quite activities happened during that. The first was Dr. Lee joined in, and Dr. Lee played a very important role during his tenure with Google in China, bridging gap between the tech giant and Chinese authorities, both from technological Western point of view and more cultural point of view from China. Then Google got relaunched, and this was the censored version in 2006. There was, during this period, there were a lot of back and forth negotiation happened between both parties. But soon in 2009, Professor Lee got he left Google, but in 2009, there was a major event where Google got blocked by one of the major services, YouTube as well. Then in 2010, there was a censorship got basically in the way of Google, and they have to basically exit China in 2010. Then, of course, there was after the exiting, they were present in the country in a different form and shape, but their major search engine was not working in China. In 2014, there was a complete blockade from Chinese authorities for Google. Now, after that, there were attempts and re-attempts to enter mainland China. And we will discuss in, okay, what shape and form Google present currently in China, and what would have been happening now for Google to re-enter China. We move to the next part of the presentation. Here, of course, in order to understand a negotiation, we need to understand what are the parties involved. Of course, Google as a tech giant and Chinese government are the key player in this whole negotiation. Key issues up till now, we understand there was a censorship, one of the major concern by authorities. Then there were data privacy concerns, and then there was a hacking allegation by the tech giant on the authorities. And then there was a mounting regulatory pressure and some of the market challenges, because China was building its own infrastructure, tech infrastructure, as well as a competitor. So there was a lot of pushback from the users and using more Chinese-born and made app infrastructure. Of course, now this all resulting into very limited pressure and eventually a withdrawal. Of course, China has a very, I would say, strict policies for Western tech companies to enter in China, and that's basically hovering around compliance and censorship challenges for all the tech companies. We move to the next. In entry and initial growth area, I think it is a big time for the tech giant, and there was a launching and relaunching of I would say a simplified Chinese search engine by Google, and then google.cn launched, which was compliant with the censorship law. Then there was some escalating challenges along the way when YouTube got blocked, and then Dr. Lee resigns over some of the censorship debates. Some turning points happened in 2010, where there was some of the hacking allegation happened, which was targeting some of the Gmail account of human rights activists. And then there was some of the redirection of traffic through google.com.hong Kong based server of Google. And then, of course, they had to end this automatic redirection to save the license. We move to the next. Post 2010, further development were not in favor of Google. Market share was shrinking rapidly. And then Google, Gmail and Chrome services was blocked by mainland China. There was a re-entry because of the whole development in AI and the launch of Google AI China Center in 2016. And then there was a project Dragonfly, which got very, I would say, a debate internally in Google and got backlash, and then Google has to basically shut it down. Then, of course, there were in 2010 there were some challenges to operate via Hong Kong, and then those operations got seized as well. So, in order to see what shape and form Google present, we move to the next slide. So there are basically three major areas where Google is present in China. One is advertising services. This advertising services is basically providing opportunities to Chinese businesses to connect with the outside Western or opportunities. Then cloud computing, it's on the rise as well. And then, of course, a minor portion of app development support. Of course, the revenues from all these three pillars are not being shared by Google. Totally, if we see the quantum of this operation, they are total close to 1,500 employees are working currently in Google China, and their offices are in Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen. These are more sales and research and development facilities. So, of course, there must be some of the negotiation happening, not very actively being shared by both parties. But let's try to unpack and let's analyze it, what would have been happening and what could have been happening in the future as well. So with this, I would hand over to Julliet. So Julliet, over to you.
Thank you, Waqas. So here we want to understand what could Google do better, or could they? To answer this question, let's first look at the challenges Google is facing. The main challenge they face is ethical dilemma, the free speech versus censorship, which is Google's philosophy versus pragmatism. So Google's philosophy, as we all know, is free speech and open information that conflicts directly with China's policy of information control. So this creates a binary challenge, whether to upholding principles or to adapting to reality. So the key challenge is to find a path that allow engagement in Chinese market without undermining its ethical framework. Next, please. Let's look at some of case studies. For example, Facebook, despite Mark Zuckerberg's effort, including studying Mandarin, meeting Chinese officials, and advocating for Facebook's role in global connectivity, the platform was never allowed to operate freely. Facebook's emphasis on open dialogue conflicts directly with China's approach to controlling social discourse. Similarly, Google, even with Project Dragon, Google faced immense pushback from its own employees and global stakeholders. Its 2010 exit from China due to censorship dispute marked a fundamental incompatibility of its ethos with China's policy. There are other examples, including Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all of which are blocked in China. Next, please. So let's take a deep dive in the analysis of Google's negotiation with China using the cultural framework. First, let's look at a problem dimension. Let's look at Google's value. It is emphasized on transparency, open access to information, and global ethical standards, whereas China's value is prioritizing collective harmony, political stability, and control over information. In terms of interests, they're different too. Google presents a Western individualistic approach, prioritizing its corporate philosophy and a global brand image, whereas China prioritizes collective national interest, including political stability and cultural values, over external partnership. Whether the relationships are long-term or short-term. Initially, for Google, they pursue a long-term market presence by complying with censorship, but later on, they prioritize short-term reputational gain by exiting the market. And look at China, they focus on long-term control over information and aligning partnerships with national policies. Results or relationships. Google emphasizes on results, which is profitability and adherence to value, whereas China prioritizes relationships with firms willing to respect its regulatory framework. Next, please. Let's also look at the solution or agreement differences. Negotiations initially sought a win-win solution, but evolved into a win-lose dynamic due to the conflicting values. In this case, China is more on the win side, and then Google is on the lose side. Whether it's risk-taking or risk aversion, clearly Google exhibits risk-taking by entering the Chinese market and then later by challenging censorship laws, whereas China demonstrated a risk aversion, maintaining strict control over information. Whether it's principle or details, Google focused on principle, that is free speech and ethics, and China emphasizes on detailed compliance with law and regulations. So in terms of style, whether it's formal or informal negotiation, agreements were formal but heavily influenced by informal, opaque regulatory expectations. Next, please. Now let's look at the people dimension. Let's look at who are the players. At Google, the players are CEO, legal teams, and technical experts. In China, it's government bodies, including the Cyberspace Administration of China and influential political leaders. Who decides what? Google's decisions were centralized, reflecting a hierarchy hierarchical decision-making process, whereas China, decision-making was distributed among various government agencies, often opaque and influenced by political considerations. And there are also informal influences. The Chinese government's indirect control mechanisms, such as pressure on local businesses and regulatory barriers, played a significant role. Next, please. Let's look at a key obstacles of negotiation. We have geopolitical priorities. The Chinese government prioritizes sovereignty over its information space. Any service that bypasses censorship or spread undesirable information is viewed as a threat to national security. Allowing Google to operate in China with minimal restrictions could undermine the government's control over its citizens' information censorship consumption. And also, let's look at an existing ecosystem. In China now, domestically, they have internet companies such as Baidu, WeChat, Alibaba. They have filled gaps left by foreign companies. These companies, aligned closely with government regulations, make foreign players less necessary. And China's Great Firewall ensured these domestic companies thrive by keeping competitions out. There's also trust deficits. China's leadership might view Google as a potential conduit for foreign influence or even espionage, given past cyber-related tensions. Next, please. So in this case, why did the Chinese government allow Google to operate still? The Chinese government permits Google to operate in selected areas because these activities align with its economic and strategic goals without threatening its control over information and propaganda. Their economic goal is advertising revenue for domestic companies, and economic development by Google hiring local job, creating local jobs, and providing advanced technology training to employees, that fostering economic growth in the key cities like Shanghai, Beijing, and Shenzhen. Next, please. And also, Google's presence, advanced research and innovation, like AI and technology development, and talent development, and so on. Next, please. Most importantly, it poses no threat to information control because its non-content activities, advertising, cloud computing, AI, it's all non-content activities. And also, it's a data localization, create cyber security to China. Next, please. Is this the result of effective negotiation by Google? The fact that they still have an operation in China? Yes, in part. Google had targeted a strategy. Google strategically chosen areas of operation that align with China's policies and are less likely to provoke government restrictions. It focuses on non-content related business, shows an understanding of what is acceptable in China regulatory environment. And by adhering to China's strict regulation requirements for advertising and research, Google demonstrates a willingness to cooperate without overstepping boundaries. But honestly, most importantly, it's China's strategic choice. China's decision to allow Google in the limited operations is driven by its own economic and technological interests. Google's presence benefits China's global competitiveness without posing significant risk to its political or social control. Next, please.
Okay.
So yeah, now let's pass to Alison.
Okay, so thanks Julliet and Waqas for providing the background and context of this case study. The question that we have now is, what would we have done differently as chief negotiator of Google? To be honest, after going through the negotiation analysis via the cultural framework, I don't think we would have done that much differently. Because, I mean, this is a business deal that we're talking about, a business deal negotiation. In truth, has Google withdrawn fully from China? No, they're actually still earning revenue from China. It is true that the Google search engine it's not available in mainland China, but they have moved and shifted their focus to outbound advertising revenue. Chinese users, especially the bigger customers like ByteDance, Cheetah Mobile, Alibaba, are still using Google's advertising services to target overseas buyers on their platform. So I would say this is still considered a win for Google, despite what we see on the surface. So since we're talking about business negotiations, as what the team had mentioned earlier on, there are two parties, the Chinese government as well as Google. We will first need to start by understanding their interests. For the Chinese government, their topmost priorities are the technological parity and brain drain of the people, as well as economic growth and stability. So the Chinese government is more interested in how Google's presence can be highlighted in China, and how can that help to contribute to China's goal of technology parity with the US, and how this research and development center from Google can create jobs for Chinese engineers, which may help to reduce the brain drain of its talented people to the US. And in this aspect, it also kind of acknowledges China's desire to improve its economy while maintaining political stability. So then the question that the Chinese government might have is, are we able to allow Google to operate in China with these specific filters in place? For Google, they are a huge business. Automatically, we think about what is their main objective, which is to maximize value to their shareholders, or rather profitability. The second one would be more in terms of how do they manage this brand among all of these questions and concerns about ethics. Here we kind of want to acknowledge that Google has and still has in its code of conduct a don't be evil philosophy. We would propose to them, maybe to Google, to enhance their transparency measures, such as publishing regular reports on content removal requests, as well as Google having, or rather being willing to comply with local laws and regulations while staying true to its principles. And we see this more prevalently in Europe. And we think this can be applied to this particular case study. So aside from all of these interests that seem to be quite different, what is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, which is also known as finding common ground? Juliet had briefly touched on this earlier on the focus on shared interests like economic growth, job creation, and technology transfer. We would also suggest having to explore a phased approach, which I believe is what we are seeing currently, which is to start with a limited scope of services and expand as the trust level builds. The third thing that we would propose is to identify and utilize key personnel's expertise and standing. So Waqas had mentioned very briefly in the case history is that there was a key figure, Dr. Lee Kai-Fu, who was hired as the CEO of Google when it was started. This particular person is interesting because he is a widely acclaimed computer scientist who is also well regarded in the Chinese technology circles as well as abroad globally. So he has an intimate understanding of both Chinese culture as well as Google's values and can help to bridge the gap between these two parties. So in the future, if Google was to re-enter China, is to, let's see, how can we capture these talents and help Google re-enter China while leveraging on these expertise and standing. Now, since I believe what we are witnessing now is the phase approach where Google is operating in China with a limited scope of services. What we are looking towards is possible avenues for re-entry and how can we renegotiate for that. Here are some items that we are proposing, listing in order of priority or preference. The topmost would be how can we how can Google find strategic partnerships with Chinese companies, for example, Tencent, Alibaba, ByteDance, Huawei, or Jingdong? Can Google explore joint ventures with these state-aligned Chinese firms to develop localized compliant products that also addresses China's specific needs? This will help Google to gain a foothold while sharing the burden of regulatory compliance with the local partners. Second of all, and again, this is what we are looking now, is to focus on non-search businesses. So this would be in terms of cloud computing, where perhaps Google can focus on enterprise solutions to expand and again, help to circumvent your content-sensitive issues. Second of all would be research and development on new frontiers. So what we see today are artificial intelligence, AI, machine learning research projects, or maybe even quantum computing. And collaboration on these three fronts could help to align China's strategic goals. The third in this aspect would be to continue to support Android and app ecosystems, which will help to keep Google relevant in the market without directly challenging the Chinese government's content policies. So while we move on, Google is still creating technology infrastructure and in other areas of the world. So Google could offer its expertise in this area to the Chinese government to help to build smarter cities, offer better policies in terms of clean energy solutions, or even urban planning technologies. These areas are technically less politically sensitive and help with China's urban development priorities. Furthermore, we also think that what Google could help with in terms of collaborations would be to engage with China on setting global standards for artificial intelligence ethics, cybersecurity, or even 5G technologies, or maybe in the future, even 6G technologies when that happens. So this may pave the way forward for improved dialogue and potential concessions. Lastly, we think that Google can consider developing a censored version of its search engines, but this may come with significant ethical and reputational risk for Google. So that's why this is relatively lower on the list of possible avenues for re-entry negotiation. So here we would like to also remind Google on the Chinese negotiation style. First of all, is to always be patient and be prepared for extended negotiation periods. The Chinese government is known for goals where they are looking forward, not just in the next 10 or 20 years, but they're looking in the horizon of 50 to 70 years. So be patient, be prepared to also be flexible and adaptable. And maybe to also learn from other business leaders in China, for example, Microsoft or even the Amazons of today. So these are things that, to always be on the lookout for. So while we are looking at this, since, as I mentioned, the Chinese government is always looking in the long term, we also feel that there are other factors that in the long-term outlook could affect this, mostly being the changes in the geopolitical landscape. First of all, what we see today is these economic pressures that are facing China. A slowdown in China's domestic economy could make the government more open to foreign investments. Second of all, China is facing an aging population, as well as there will be a time that the leadership will change in China. So over time, maybe this new leadership might adopt a more flexible approach to foreign technology companies. Third of all, global trends in technology. Maybe one day Google could develop proprietary technologies that China cannot even replicate domestically. So in this case, Google might regain leverage in future negotiations. And last but not least, Google should not forget the intergovernmental organization ties, such as China's ties with, for example, the BRICS countries. So if you look at the diagram on the right, we see that yes, China has the largest digital population in the world as of January 2024. But if you look at the BRICS portion, you see that India, Brazil, and Russia also have significant digital populations in the world, and Google should not burn this bridge. Instead, they should leverage on this cordial relationship with China, and maybe shift their focus on increasing their market shares in the BRICS countries as a whole. So in conclusion, we think that for the foreseeable future, the chances of a comprehensive negotiation between Google and China are slim due to deep-rooted geopolitical, cultural, as well as fundamental value differences. There is, however, still some limited room for collaboration in less politically sensitive areas, but ultimately the success of any negotiation will depend on Google's willingness to adapt its approach to align with China's priorities without compromising its global values. So this is an incredibly delicate balance to achieve, but this is something that I believe it is worth keeping an eye on. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation of this case study, and thank you.
Thank you, Alison.
Thank you.